Hey folks, Quilly here, and welcome to another episode of our Europa Universalis 4 tutorial for complete beginners. We are just about ready to unpause the game. We've done a lot of the initial setup, gotten our relationships and targets all planted, our diplomats are all busy, are saving some money by reducing the maintenance of our soldiers, and we've dealt with basically all of the alerts over here. The only things that are left are reminding us that there is a truce with Granada that will expire at some point, and some disputed successions, shows you countries without heirs, and if you were to royal marry those countries, there's a little bit of a chance at some point that you might inherit them, but we're going to just leave that off for now. So the thing we're going to talk about in this episode are navies and trade, and we're going to talk about the two of them together because they are very, very tightly interlinked. First of all, our navies over here. Very much like military units, you can select them by clicking on them. If there's more than one in one area, you can toggle between them, and you can box select a group like this to select both navies. We could join the two navies into a single navy. We can create a new unit and split some of them off like that, for example. Close this. Once again, we have two navies over here. You can move a navy. If it's selected, you can right-click somewhere, and you will send the navy along its way. Of course, the game is still currently paused, but the navies will move very much like armies. And if you are at war, if there's a navy in the same sea zone as another enemy navy, they will fight. Same thing as if you have two armies, your army and an enemy army in the same province, they will fight one another. Navies have morale, just like ground troops. Yeah. Good. Let's talk about the four different types of ships. Yes, right, that's the next topic. There are four different types of ships. So in the infantry, or in the ground army, we didn't really talk about it, but there are infantry, there's cavalry, and there's artillery. We don't have the ability to build artillery yet, but that will be very significant later on. For ships, there are four different kinds. There are heavy ships, light ships, galleys, which we don't currently have any of, and transports. Transport ships don't really fight. They are really meant to load troops on. One transport can hold one regiment of 1,000 troops, and you can use them. So, for example, if we were going to war with Aragon, then we might want to go and invade their islands, so we would need transports for that. Or if we go to war with Granada and they happen to be allied with Tunis, which is often what happens, then we might need to ferry some troops over to Tunis and to fight there. So that's what transports are. The other three are kind of interesting, and the best way to explain it is probably to open up our little country management screen over here and go to the military tab. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, but it gives you a breakdown of the stats of your units. I mean, there's lots of things, but what we're going to focus on in this is this area right over here with naval units. This shows us our four types of ships: the heavies, lights, galleys, and transports, and they're currently called. Our heavy ship class is currently referred to as heavy carracks. Our light ships are currently barks. Our current galleys are currently galleys, and our current transport ships are currently cogs. This is the cost to build a ship. So the heavies cost 50 gold each, the barks cost 20, the galleys cost 10, and the transports cost 12. They also have a maintenance amount. It's the amount of money you have to pay per month to keep your ships around. The cogs cost 0.04 gold per month each. The galleys cost 0.03 gold per month, slightly cheaper. The light ships cost 0.04 per month, same as the cogs, and slightly more than the galleys. And the heavies cost 0.44, not 0.04, but 0.44. They are 11 times as expensive as a bark and a cog, or I don't know, however many more times more expensive than the galley. Heavy ships are ridiculously expensive. They're fairly pricey to build, but insanely expensive to maintain. They can bankrupt you, but they are the kings of the sea. Their combat strength can be determined basically by a combination of cannons and hull size. Hull size is basically hit points, so right away you can see that the heavy ships, our early carracks rather, are twice as powerful or twice as tough as most of our other ships, and deal 4 times as much damage. That's quite a bit. In a sense, you can almost treat these as being 8 times more powerful in combat, right? Because they're twice as sturdy while dealing 4 times as much damage. They're about 4 times as effective as, say, a light ship. Slightly more even than that, because light ships only have a hull size of 8. But they cost more than twice as much to build and 11 times as much to maintain. So you are paying for that power. But man, that is a lot of power. So at a glance, the light ships and the galleys seem to be about similar in strength. Technically, the galleys have a couple more cannons, okay, and the galleys are also cheaper. So wouldn't you always build the galleys all the time? Well, perhaps, especially when I tell you that galleys, this strength is deceptive. This is their normal combat strength. But galleys, if a galley is on an inland sea, so that is basically something like the Mediterranean or the Baltic. And in fact, if you mouse over a tile, it'll tell you if it's an inland sea. So Gulf of Almeria here counts as an inland sea. Galleys will be more effective here, performing at higher levels in combat. Whereas the Straits of Gibraltar counts as being part of the normal ocean, it is not inland sea. Galleys are like twice as good, basically, when you are fighting on an inland sea. So now all of a sudden, galleys are cheaper, have a tougher base strength, and in fact are considerably more powerful as long as you're fighting over here. Why would you ever build light ships? Because unlike every other type of ship, light ships have trade power. So you can see the heavies have 0, the galleys have 0, the transports have 0, the barks, this type of light ship, these barks, have a trade power of 2. This is where the power of light ships comes in. So let's talk about trade. And actually, before we talk about trade, we're going to talk about production. Let's have a look at Toledo over here. If I left click on it, I will get information about this province. And it's got a lot of stuff going on for it, okay? There's a bunch of stuff on the screen, but we're going to focus right now at the very bottom here. Toledo has iron. Every province in the game has a trade good. So we've got iron here, Madrid has cloth, Caceres has wool, Salamanca has grain. Now, every trade good has a certain price. Grain has currently, its price is 2 gold per unit, and iron is 3 gold per unit. Iron is more valuable than grain, and that actually will become even more amplified later in the game. Iron becomes more and more and more valuable. Really, really good resource. In addition to having a value, each province also produces a certain number of goods. So you can see here, Toledo produces 1.2 units of goods, okay, per blah. It's per year, actually, but let's leave that kind of fuzzy. It has a goods production rate of 1.2 compared to Salamanca, which also has a good production rate of 1.2, but of course its goods are worth less. Caceres over here, wool is worth almost as much as iron at 2.5, but it's only producing 0.4 units of goods. It's a third as much as goods. So every province has a good that has a certain value and produces a certain number of it. The goods production is based primarily on this value here, the base production. This as a whole is referred to as the province's development. There's base tax, base production, and base manpower. And if you add all these numbers up, it gives you just a generic development number over here. If we compare Toledo with its development 16, it's obviously a much more developed province than Caceres. You know, mostly there's probably no big cities over here. It's a lot more rural, that sort of thing. So every province will have slightly different values for that. Now, that production amount, so tax, obviously, tax goes into your coffers directly. Also, based on its production over here, it will also add a certain amount of production value directly to your coffers. So Toledo, this is monthly, every month produces 0.84 gold that goes directly into your bank account. And we can see that on our economy screen over here. We can see our taxation, and we can get a breakdown of where it comes from every province, as well as production, and that comes from a variety of provinces. And this goes directly into your bank account. Okay, taxation and production. And you can see here our production efficiency is 15%. We're getting 15% more money from production than its normal base amount. 5% of that is coming from technology, but 10% of that is because of that advisor we hired over here. Yeah, this advisor is making us effectively 10% more money. So whatever our base amount here was, which let's say it was 3.5. So that advisor is adding an extra 0.35 gold per month, more or less. Let's pretend that that's true. So that's pretty good. He's not quite paying for himself because he costs you 1 per month, but he's also giving you an admin power. So he's partially paying for himself, and that's an awfully, awfully nice thing. Okay, so that production from goods goes directly into your bank account, but that's not the only place that it goes. And some of you guys might be looking at this trade line at this point. Every province that produces goods, well, literally every province produces goods. Those goods partially go into the bank account of the owner, but also partially contribute to the value of a trade node. So there's a trade map mode over here. It looks like a crate with maybe a barrel next to it. If you don't have it for some reason, you can go into economic map modes over here, and it'll be the first thing in the list. And if we click on that, we get a very different looking world. So rather than being colored by country here, the world is broken down into trade nodes. Every province belongs to one and only one trade node, and there is nothing in the game that will change which trade node a province belongs to. So you can see most of our provinces belong to the Seville trade node, the Sevilla trade node, okay, which is colored green. Green is the Seville trade node. Portugal is all in the Seville trade node. Also, little bits of Northern Africa are in the Seville trade node, which is very interesting. 2 of our provinces over here belong to the Bordeaux trade node, but that is so insignificant, we're just going to ignore that for the tutorial. So every province contributes a certain amount of trade value to a trade node. And all of that put together results in a total amount of trade value for all provinces belonging to the trade node. We can see Toledo up there has got the trade value per year of 3.6 gold, so per month it's 0.3. So all in all, every month in this trade node, there is 5.6 gold up for grabs, and it's a combination of everyone's trade value. No matter if I produce it, if Portugal produces it, if Granada produces it, or if I think that's Morocco over here. Yeah, or if Morocco produces it. Doesn't matter who the owner of the province is. All that trade value gets thrown together in the trade node under the local. We're going to ignore incoming and outgoing for a moment. So it's got a value there. In addition to that, every province supplies a certain amount of trade power. So you can see Toledo here has 3.8 trade power. Some of it from its development, some of it from a modifier called mercantilism that we might look at later on. The owner of those provinces, so every one of these green provinces that is mine, contributes to my total trade power from provinces. So you can see it here. If we look, we can see Toledo's got that 3.8. You can see Seville, for some reason, has 33 trade power. We'll look at that a little bit later. So I have a total amount of trade power from provinces here. And we've got some multiplier that's giving me a boost as well. We're giving me a total final trade power of 106.8, which you can actually see on this little panel here. So if we click on this panel, this opens up details about this trade node over here. So we have a total amount of trade power. And trade power is compared to everyone else who's also got trade power here. So Portugal has 104. Makes sense, they have a lot. And then after that, it kind of goes away. Aragon's got a little bit, Granada's got a little bit, and so on and so forth. So everyone else has a very small amount. So trade value increases the size of the pie. More trade value makes a bigger pie in Seville. More trade power means we get a bigger slice of the pie. We get 36% of the pie. Portugal gets 35% because they have slightly less trade power than me. And then Granada gets 5%. And everyone else gets a tiny, tiny microscopic amount of the pie. The big players in the trade node are me and Portugal. The bigger the slice of the pie, the more money we will get out of this node. Now, the reason we get money out of this node is because we are collecting from it. Okay? There are two things you can do in a trade node. You can either collect money from the trade node, or you can transfer trade out of that trade node to another one. That's what all these arrows mean. Now, it might be a little bit unexpected, but transferring trade is actually the default. If you don't do anything, you will typically be transferring trade out of a trade node to another trade node. Your home node is the exception. So this is our main trading port. The reason it's our main trading port is because our capital is in this node. Because our capital is in this node, this is our main trading port, and by default, we will collect trade from here. And so that's why we're collecting trade out of this trade node. But otherwise, the default is to transfer. Now, if I click on a random trade node, let's say I click on Alexandria, we see two buttons. We can send a merchant, and we can send a merchant to collect trade or transfer trade power. This is a bit of a misnomer. By the way, they're both grayed out because this trade zone is too far away from us. As we develop better technology, our trade range will increase, but right now Alexandria is too far away for us to do anything with. Okay? So this transfer trade power button is a bit of a misnomer because transferring trade power is what happens by default. What sending a merchant under the guise of transferring trade power does is actually allow us to steer trade. So let's take a look at what that means. So steering trade is what this incoming and outgoing is. Let's start actually by looking at Tunis over here. Tunis is a trade node in which we have no territory. And we can confirm that because if we find ourselves in the list, Castile, we have 0 power from provinces, right? Province trade power is 0. We own no land in Tunis whatsoever. But we do have a little bit of trade power. We do have a merchant here. We can see Alonso is one of our merchants, and he's in Tunis over here. We can see our list of merchants in the outliner. We've got one in Tunis and one in Safi. We can also see up here that we have 2 merchants in total, but we have 0 available. Our merchants are all deployed. So we have a merchant sitting in Tunis. That gives us technically 2 trade power, which is insignificant. Mostly the trade power from a merchant you ignore. We have a tiny little bit of bonus, 1.5% bonus. So 2 trade power times 1.5% equals 18.8? That doesn't sound right. The reason we have more trade power than you might expect is because we have so much trade power in Seville that some of the trade power backflows up here. We can ignore the mechanics of that, ignore the math behind it, doesn't matter. We have X amount of trade power here in Tunis. We actually have 10% of the total trade power over here. Now, ignoring the fact that we have a merchant, okay? Right now, only, how many countries, I wonder? There's a few countries that have their home in Tunis. Hey, Tunis itself, Jared, potentially Fezzan. Yeah, Fezzan's capital is here. Mazab, well, that's not the country name, is it? Oh, it is Mazab. And Tugert over here, all have their home in the Tunisian trade node. And we can see, if we click on Tunis, we can see under this merchant mission list, everywhere that's a plus, these are people who are collecting trade out of this node. And everyone with an arrow is transferring trade. What they're doing is they're pulling trade out of Tunis and transferring it up to another trade node. And that's what our merchant is really doing here. Even if we didn't have a merchant, we would be transferring trade out of Tunis towards someone else. There's two ways trade can leave Tunis. There's Genoa, and there is Seville. And we would obviously like all the trade to go to Seville. And what our merchant does is our merchant is helping to steer trade towards Seville. So our trade power in this node just means trade is leaving Tunis and will leave towards a combination of Genoa and Seville. What our merchants are steering trade to determine what ratio that is happening at. So there is actually 4 countries here that are trying to push trade towards Seville, and 1 country, Aragon, which is trying to push trade towards Genoa. Aragon has quite a bit of trade power over here, because they actually own a little bit of land in this node. That's part of it. And they're also pushing some more trade power perhaps out of Genoa this way. So they're pulling a fair bit of trade this way, and these 4 countries are pulling a fair bit of trade the other way. The more countries that are pushing trade towards a node, there's a diminishing return. So you can see here the ratio from each country. So we're increasing the outgoing value towards Seville by 5.3%. Grenada's doing 2.6, Portugal's doing 1.8, Morocco's doing 1.3. There's a bit of a diminishing return. I think after like 5 countries, you're not really going to get a whole lot more pressure that way. So anyway, don't want to get too nitty gritty. Okay, there are 2 things you can, let's reiterate, there's 2 things you can do in a trade node. You can transfer trade power out of a trade node, which is what happens if you do nothing. If it's not your capital and you don't have a merchant there, you automatically always transfer trade out of a node if you have any power there. But by default, it may get split in a couple of different directions, including a direction you don't want. By sending a merchant to a node, you can collect money directly from there. I'll tell you why that's bad to mostly do in a moment. Or you can have your merchant contribute to steering trade in a direction. Your merchant doesn't really affect how much trade is being transferred out of the node because he's only worth 2 trade power. But he does help to steer it in a correct direction. In this case, we want to steer it towards Seville, which means our merchant, we have a merchant in Safi. Safi only has 1 possible output. We really don't need a merchant here. Actually, our merchant is doing almost nothing in Safi. It's worth noting, I believe if there are 0 merchants in a node, I think any pressure automatically divides the trade among all outgoing routes. I'm a little fuzzy about that, but I'm pretty sure. Also, if there's only 1 merchant doing this trade steering, it's guaranteed that 100% of the trade will be steered by that merchant. Whereas literally, let's say we could send a merchant over here. In the hypothetical situation, we could send a merchant to Alexandria, and no one else was steering trade. No one else had a merchant in Alexandria that was sending trade. We could have 1 merchant in Alexandria, even though we have no trade power. We don't have any land here. We don't have any ships here. Our 1 merchant could direct all outgoing trade towards, I don't know, somewhere like Genoa. We could send all trade in one direction. Now, the majority of the trade would probably still stay there. That's what this circle does. The green bit is how much trade is staying here, and the red bit is how much trade is going away. Adding a merchant here isn't really going to contribute to the red bit. It's not going to change that. It's just helping to decide where that red part is being directed. Okay? So, there is a size of the pie. There is the size of your piece of the pie. So, right, the size of the pie versus your piece of the pie. And what are you doing with the piece of the pie? In Seville, we're using that piece of the pie to collect the money and put it in our coffers. In Tunis and in Safi, we are using our piece of the pie to remove trade from this node and send it towards Seville. Generally speaking, you just want to be collecting in one place. And generally speaking, you want that place to be your capital. Again, wherever your main trade port is, you automatically collect trade. We could, since we don't need a merchant at Safi to be steering trade in this direction. First of all, there's only 1 possible output, and secondly, other people are already steering trade in this direction. Our merchant's really not doing anything at all over here. We might be tempted to send our merchant to Genoa to collect trade over here. Genoa is worth a lot. It's worth like twice as much. Seville is worth 7.3. Genoa is worth 15.7. Genoa is twice as valuable. There's twice as much pie over here. If we sent a merchant, we could start collecting trade over here. Because right now we're not doing anything in Genoa. Arguably there's a bit of backflow, let's ignore that. Right now we're not doing anything in Genoa. If we sent a merchant over here, we could start collecting trade. But our merchant, with its puny 2 trade power, the slice of the pie would be microscopic. We'd be lucky to see a single cent out of this. But we could go and boost our trade power over here. How do we boost our trade power? One, if we owned land over here, right? If we owned provinces in the Genoan trade node, we would get more trade power over here. Two is with ships. Light ships project trade power. Each of our current barks produce 2 trade power. So let's see how that works. So we have our fleet over here. We got a fleet, a mixed fleet of a few different types of ships. Let's split the light ships off independently. We don't need to. There's this button here that's protect trade. This is automatically lit up if you've got a fleet with any light ships whatsoever, but it's usually a good idea to split off your light ships. We can do that with this create new unit button by moving all of our barks over to the right hand side, but it's often more convenient to simply hit this button here, which will automatically detach all units of this type to its own fleet. So now we have 2 fleets. One is our heavies and our transports, and the other fleet is just our lights. So we're going to select our 5 light ships, and we know each one of these ships has 2 trade power. So if we send it somewhere, we will have 10 trade power. We could send it over here in Genoa, but between our merchant and our light ships, we'd only have 12 trade power, plus multiply by other things, which is still not much of a pie. Also, there is a downside to sending our merchant to collect trade here. There is a neat little bonus. In Seville, we saw, right now, we have 83 power from our provinces. We also get plus 21%. So whatever our actual trade power is, we're adding 21.5% to that value. And what is that coming from? Mostly, it's coming because we have merchants transferring trade. Every merchant that is transferring trade somewhere in the world, doesn't matter where they are, anywhere in the world you have a merchant transferring trade, you get 10% more trade power in your capital. It will cap out. It can't go higher than 100% bonus. So if you had like 20 merchants, you still would only get a plus 100%, but that's still pretty damn good. So every merchant transferring trade gives you more trade power in your capital. That's amazing. So if we were to move the merchant out of Safi to Genoa, yeah, we'd be collecting a little bit of trade over in Genoa, but we would be losing that 10% multiplier in Seville. Now, without opening up a spreadsheet, we don't know what that would mean in the end. And you are encouraged to test. I'm going to encourage you to test that stuff out. Send a merchant to collect trade in Genoa. Then send your fleet over in Genoa to give you more trade power. See what happens. Compare what happens to your trade income. Right now, our trade income is 3.46. And we can actually get that. We see that because if we click on Seville, we know we're earning 3.46 over here. You might be wondering exactly how we come up with that number, because the total value of Seville is currently 7.3, and we're getting 36%. Well, 36% of 7.3 is not as much as this. But we have extra multipliers being applied. We have extra things, especially if you go to the trade tab over here, you can see some extra values that are improving some of the income that we're going to get. Ignore this last month we got X number of trade. This is inaccurate because we haven't played for a month yet. So it'll be accurate in the future, but right now it's off. But the idea is set up your trade, let it process for a month. Okay, at the end of the month, so December 1st, we'll get an update on our trade. Then move your merchants around, move your fleets around, see what happens. Does your trade go up? Does it go down? I don't know. You'll have to find out. Almost certainly if you moved it to Genoa, if you moved a merchant from Safi to Genoa, you would lose money because you'd be getting almost nothing out of Genoa, and losing that 10% bonus in Castile would hurt. There's one other thing you can do with your merchant though. If you were to move your merchant from Safi to Seville, now you know your merchant would only add 2 trade power. So you can ignore the contribution of trade power that he would be giving you in Seville. You'd also lose the 10% to trade power. So you would have, not exactly, but let's say you'd have 10% less trade power in Seville, right? Because you'd lose that 10% bonus. So what would your merchant be doing here? Well, if you have a merchant collecting trade, you will earn 10% more gold. So you'll have 10% less trade power, but from what you will earn 10% more gold. How does that work out? Generally, again, not worthwhile. And part of the reason is, first of all, usually the amount of actual money you earn will go down because of a variety of reasons. But not only that, it's because of the way the various multipliers add up and work together. You will probably lose money. But not only that, by reducing your trade power in this node, that means your piece of the pie shrinks, which means everyone else's piece of the pie grows. So not only will you get less money, your opposition will start to get more money. Trade is not just about making the most amount of money for you. Part of the magic of trade is trying to minimize how much money other people get, and you can compete on that. And that leads to some interesting decisions. Later on, you might decide to make some moves in trade that are not optimal for your final bank account, but are really good at damaging your opponents. That starts to become incredibly true once you start to get privateers, which is an expansion thing. There's some neat things. But yeah, as Venice, like you start to be tempted really early on to try to start messing with Constantinople over here, to deny the Ottomans some money, even if it's not necessarily a great way for you to make the most amount of money. There's all sorts of little funny things that you can start doing with trade. But again, to reiterate the basis, every province you have creates a certain amount of goods that get added to a trade node. Every province you have also gives you a certain amount of trade power. So do ships. The more trade power you have, the bigger the slice of your pie in a node. Mostly, you want to collect trade in your capital, and other than that, you're trying to transfer as much trade to your capital as possible. Playing as Castile here, we're going to try to dominate the Seville trade node. We would like to see our total slice of this pie hit 50, 60, 70, maybe even 80% later on. That's going to be hard with Portugal here. Portugal will project a lot of trade power in Seville, but we're going to try to grow this as much as possible. Once we start to feel like we can't grow it anymore, which might happen quite early. A lot of times you do compete for that 70 or 80% trade power in a node. Because Portugal's such a powerhouse in trade, we might not be able to do that. But once we get to 50 or 60% in Seville, and adding more ships or whatever really doesn't give us a whole lot more trade power, instead we're going to start focusing on pulling more trade out of Tunis, pulling more trade out of Safi, pulling more trade out of the Ivory Coast, which we can't see yet. But expanding to the Ivory Coast and pulling more trade out of here is going to be a way to add value there. And we're going to keep backing up. After the Ivory Coast, we're going to do the Cape. After the Cape, we're going to do Zanzibar. Then we're going to do the Gulf of Aden. Because the Gulf of Aden flows in from India. Then from India, we're going to do Malacca into Beijing. I don't remember what all the trade nodes are called right now. But late in the game, when we do expanding things into the Far East over here, we're going to be pulling trade out of China through to India, through to the Gulf of Aden, where we're going to send it south to Zanzibar, all around the coast of Africa to end up in Seville. Meanwhile, someone like Venice might be fighting in Aden to pull all that trade from the Far East over into Alexandria. And from Alexandria, well, certainly the Ottomans are going to be trying to pull it to Constantinople. Venice is going to try to pull it to Venice, and the Genoan Republic might try to pull it to Genoa. We might change our mind at some point. If we go and expand into Genoa, if we take all this territory and get more and more influence over the Genoan trade node, we might stop collecting in Seville. We might move our main trade port to Genoa. Can you do that in vanilla? Actually, I'm not sure if you can do that in vanilla. In vanilla, you might be limited to having your trade port in Seville. So we might have to send a merchant to collect in Genoa once we get a lot of trade power over here. If you are playing with whatever expansion it is, you can actually move your trading port to another node, at which point you'll automatically collect in Genoa because it'll be your main trade port, and instead we'll want to transfer trade out of Seville to Genoa, which would be really weird, but will require us to grab a lot of territory here. Last thing I want to talk about is the amount of trade power contributed by the provinces is not identical. Mostly it's based on the development. We can see here the trade power of Toledo is 3.8. And if you mouse over, you can see we get 3.2 per development. So it's 0, or not per development. We get 0.2 per development. 0.2 times 16 is equal to 3.2. And we get a 20% boost from mercantilism. We can see our mercantilism here. Mercantilism is really powerful, and you have very little ability to increase it directly. Mostly it increases via events, and you'll almost always want to take whatever decision in an event comes up that lets you improve your mercantilism. We'll be looking at that maybe a little bit later once we actually unpause, which I said we would do in this video, and I still will. Also, it is possible with the papal influence to increase your mercantilism. It's a really interesting way to do that. They added that in a relatively recent patch. Okay, let me actually fulfill my promise here and unpause. We also, okay, oh, right, all our relationships kicked in. So, our alliance request from the Pope was accepted, and the royal marriage from Navarra and Portugal both were accepted. We don't have a diplomat available right now because we have to wait for them to continue to come home, so we're going to wait a little bit longer. I do want to do one more thing with our fleet, actually, before we continue. So, we know that our light ships, oh, we didn't actually send them out. Got to do that before the end of the month. We want to send our light ships to protect trade in Seville. We know this will increase our trade power a little bit, and we get a little bit of an update here. We know, like, the fleet itself is worth 10 trade power, but because of modifiers, because of the percentages we have going on, it'll actually add 12.15 trade power to Seville. It says what is going to change our income by. It's going to change our income from 3.46 to 3.69. This is estimated. It's still going to change. And it tells us what our fleet maintenance is going to be. So it gives you a hint as to whether these fleets are going to make you money or still lose you money. Right now, they might not make us much money, but they'll at least mostly pay for themselves. So we're going to go ahead and send them there. Plus, remember, it denies money from our potential opponents, like Portugal, for example. So we're going to do that. What if we built more light ships? We only have 5. What if we built more? We have some money in the bank. What are we going to do? How many light ships can we have? So let's take a look at the production interface over here. Production interface here is where we build most things. We can recruit land units, and we will later, but we can also build ships. We can build all 4 types of ships over here. Down at the bottom of the screen, you see there's something called force limit. Land units have that as well. So currently we have 22 regiments out of a maximum of 29. We currently have 18 ships out of a maximum of 22. You can technically go above this maximum, but you end up paying ridiculous amounts of maintenance, and it's a very bad idea. Sometimes at war, you might temporarily go over your limit for land units, but it's very uncommon. And general rule is not to do that. So we're at 18 of 22 ships. We can build 4 more light ships. So we click on Bark in here. It highlights the provinces where you can build it. Not surprisingly, you can build light ships in coastal provinces and not so much in the middle of your landmass. So let's build 1, 2, 3, and 4 light ships. So we're being told over here that we are going to be at our limit of 22. That's cool. Is there any way we could get more light ships? The question is, do we need all the ships that we need now? We know that our heavy ships are incredibly expensive to maintain. We have 3 of them. They cost 0.44 gold per month. So they cost, I don't know, 1.3 something gold per month just to maintain our heavy ships. That's a lot. That's almost our entire naval budget goes towards these 3 heavy ships. Now, those heavy ships are really powerful. They let you win naval wars. Is that what we want right now, though? I am very tempted, and for the sake of argument, I'm going to do this. I'm going to, from this navy, which has 10 transports and 3 heavies, I'm going to click on the heavies here to detach them. So now I have a fleet of only the 3 heavies. I'm going to disband them. Boom. And by doing that, I save a lot of money, but I also free up 3 more force limit for barks. And many players are a fan of trying to max out as many light ships as possible. Barks make you a lot of money. They still fight okay. They're certainly not on par with heavy ships, and if you're fighting an inland sea, they're not on par with galleys. Galleys will beat light ships basically like 2 to 1 in an inland sea. Out on the ocean, they're about even. So we have weakened our naval military strength, but we will be improving our trade power substantially and hopefully making more money as a result of it. Yeah, I'm going to unpause. Other ways later on that you can, oh yeah, we'll have to send the diplomat. Later on, you can improve both your overall production, therefore generating a bigger piece of the pie with these buildings, and you can also improve your trade power in places by building these trade buildings, so you get a bigger slice of the pie. Also, I meant to mention it earlier, some provinces like Seville over here have little modifiers you can see in trade map mode. Seville is an estuary and a coastal center of trade, both of which increase your trade power substantially. That's the reason Seville is worth 33 trade power versus Toledo over here only being worth 3.8. And you can see a few places on the map that have those symbols. These are often really high priority places for you to conquer. Like Tangiers, for example, is a center of trade and is part of the Seville map trade node, so you might want to go and conquer that. All right, let's unpause a little bit more. We're going to go to the start of the next month. We're going to see exactly what happens to our trade once all those ships trigger in there. Oh, and I got to send out my diplomats. So I still can't send it to the Pope, to Navarra, or to Portugal because we have to wait 30 days between sending them stuff. I meant to start this right away, are going to suck up to France a little bit. France likes us a little. I would very much like to be able to offer an alliance or a royal marriage to them. Well, I would like to ultimately ally them. We might have to do a royal marriage first, but I would like to ally France. It'll be a really potent ally versus Aragon, defensively, if not offensively. So I'm going to send a diplomat to France to improve relations. Right away, we get a little bit of a tick up, but every month our relations will improve a little bit more until this modifier can reach all the way to plus 100, which means that just with same religion plus improved relations, we could get plus 125 with France. We'll get a little bit more because of enemy, because we both hate the same people. We will get a further modifier, and then once we get married and allied, we can probably have a plus 200 relation with France, up until whatever point we start to get some drama llama between us. I do have 2 more diplomats free. I'm going to send one to Aragon. Now, Aragon and us, we hate each other, so obviously we're not going to make friends. We're probably going to declare war on them at some point, or vice versa. We know to declare war, we need a cause for war. We need a CB, and we don't have one right now on Aragon. But we've looked at the missions, and we know if we ever want to form Spain, from Aragon we need Zaragoza, Barcelona, and Valencia. So you could imagine it might be something we want to do later on, declare war on Aragon and claim some or all of that territory, plus maybe some extras, I don't know. So what we're going to do is I'm going to open up the diplomatic map mode with Aragon, and I'm going to go to covert actions down here, and I'm going to send a diplomat to fabricate a claim on one of their provinces. Basically, he's going to go over there, he's going to forge stuff, he's going to convince the right officials and whatnot that Castile here, we have a legitimate claim on one of these provinces. I think I'm going to pick Valencia just because. And that will give us a cause for war. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to send my diplomat to Valencia. He'll take potentially a year. Sometimes it'll take longer if he gets discovered. That's fine. It might take longer than this, but it'll take at least a year. We will fabricate a claim on Valencia, and that will give us a cause to go to war with them. We know we will get a CB on Granada later on when we take that Reconquista mission. So our two targets, at some point, we will have the ability to declare war on them when we decide that that's what we want to do. Let me advance time to the start of the month so we can take a look at trade. There we go. It's December 1st, so trade is just triggered. Also, Navarra has offered us an alliance. So because we're being friendly towards Navarra, they are offering us an alliance back. You know, we've royal married them, so they say, hey, why not an alliance to go with that? Notice they've also allied France. This is one of the reasons I'm not planning on declaring war with Navarra. They often ally France, which makes it so that if we were to declare here, we'd also be fighting France. So I would gladly, over here, I'm going to gladly accept the alliance offer. Boom. So now we are royal married and allied to Navarra, and you can see we're already at 114 relationship. If we want to vassalize them, we have to get to 190. We needed an alliance, which we've got, and we need a relationship of at least 190, which we're going to work on relatively soon, and we all have to be at peace. So we're going to do that. We're going to keep advancing, and as soon as the 11th of December rolls around, I will be able to send out another relationship request to the Pope. Oh, actually, apparently the 12th. There we go. On the 12th. So we still have a mission to get a relationship to 100 with the Pope. We have an alliance with them, so we've got that bonus. We can't royal marry the Pope because they're a theocracy and they don't allow that. So I'm going to go and start improving relations with the Pope. Improve relations with the Pope. So right now that is going to mean that all my diplomats are currently busy. Which is actually a bit of a goof. Let me change my mind with the Pope here. Let me get right back to you. It's still going to take 12 days for him to get back. Grr. But it's a goof because I want to make sure I have royal married Portugal, but I also want an alliance with them. So I've done that. By the way, right-clicking on a guy here cancels the job. Also, you can click on, you can open the diplomacy view with Paris here, and I can say stop improve relations. But right-clicking on a diplomat in your outliner is also a good way to cancel the job. Okay, so now, I like that better. Oh, I'm at speed 4. I didn't realize that. Portugal has accepted the military alliance, and our diplomat is back. Let's take a look at our relations. We have a lot of stuff developing over here now. We still have the truce with Granada. We are improving relations with France. 4 countries are improving relations with us. They're just trying to suck up and make better friends. Interesting. We have an alliance with Navarra, Portugal, and the Papal States, and we're royal married to Navarra and Portugal. We also have a mission to solidify our papal relations. At this point, it's actually worth talking about this. This is our diplomatic relations count and limit. We can have 4 diplomatic relations without suffering penalties. We have 3 of them. We have diplomatic relations with Navarra. I mean, we have more than one type of relationship with Navarra, but they just count as one relation. So we have a relation with Navarra, one with Portugal, and one with the Papal State. We would very much like to develop a relationship with France soon as well, which will bring us to 4 of 4, which is our relationship limit. If we go above that, it will simply cost us 1 diplo power per month per relationship above the limit. It's not the end of the world if you were to do that, but it's certainly something that you generally want to avoid. So we are still hoping to either ally or royal marry France relatively soon. We'll just keep sucking up to them at this point. So I do have my free diplomat now, so I'm going to go and send it as soon as I can right back to the Pope. Just going to wait until the 13th of January so I don't forget here, and then we'll probably end the video. I haven't looked at trade again either, so let me just go ahead and fast forward a bit more. Speed 3. Just going to wait until the 13th. There we go. And I'm going to send that to the Pope. Okay, let's take a look at how our trade situation has developed. Well, we still have we have 37% of the pie. This rounds off a little bit differently from time to time. We have slightly more trade power because we do have our ships over here, but of course Portugal and others have moved their ships here as well. Oh, Granada actually has 18 trade power between its merchant and the trade ships. Interesting. That's from that, and we still have a variety of modifiers. I mean, we still get the biggest piece of the pie, but not by that much. Still, actually our earnings dropped a little bit, and that's because we are competing, especially with Granada here and a few others. They're taking a little bit more out of this than they were before. Notice how Morocco has negative percentage trade power. That's actually, I forgot about that modifier. When I talked about why collecting trade from Genoa would be bad, A, we lose our 10% boost to trade power in Castile, but B, collecting trade anywhere except your home node gives you a 50% penalty to your trade power in that node. So it's very hard to collect trade anywhere else. Moving a merchant to collect trade in your home node may work sometimes. Generally, it's bad. Generally, the way you want to do it is you want to only collect in your home node and you want to transfer trade everywhere else with all your rest of your merchants. That's usually the way you want to do it. And I think that will bring this overly long video to an end. We are still fabricating a claim on Valencia. It's estimated to be done 25th of November, 1445. We know we have a truce with Granada until February 1448, and we're otherwise making some friends. We will finish building our relationship up with Rome in just a few more months. We'll hit 100% with Rome, which is going to be great. That'll complete that mission, and then we'll choose another one. Sounds good. We are gearing up towards war relatively soon, especially if we don't do anything else crazy. We can just fast forward mostly until it's time for us to declare. Thanks for watching, folks. See you next time.